Hello, world. We're live. Welcome to this November 2025 edition of the Laravel Worldwide Meetup. My name is Dan Sapelsa. I'm a developer at Vehicle, and along with my co-host, Margaret Tavares, we're thrilled to once again bring you some insight from some great members of the Laravel community. Speaking of my co-host, Margaret, how are things going today for you?
Pretty good, Dan. How about yourself?
Doing well, thank you. We're heading into fall here in Canada. The weather is changing, but there's a lot of fun community events and stuff still coming up. So excited about that, and very much excited about our talk today. So, without further ado, we've got a little bit of community stuff to take care of. So, what do we got going on here, Margaret?
Thanks, Dan. Welcome, everybody. So some great resources in the community. If you haven't heard about Laravel News, it's an awesome platform ran by Eric Barnes and his team. So thank you so much. They have a weekly email newsletter, so you can check them out. And they also have a Laravel News podcast ran by Jake Bennett and Michael Drinda, where they discuss all the latest Laravel releases in the last week. And they also have some tutorials and a lot of stuff that's going on in the Laravel community. So make sure to check them out at laravelnews.com. Laravel Podcast is another awesome resource, which is actually hosted by our guest for today, Matt. So for this season, Matt seems to be having a different member from the Laravel team to get to know them. So please check them out at laravelpodcast.com. If you're somebody who's looking to hire some Laravel developers or want to post a job about some Laravel stuff, and for really all your Laravel job needs, you can check out larajobs.com. And another company that we were talking in the community that wanted to just bring some awareness that they're hiring some developers is CMS Max. So you can find some more information about them after the live meetup today in the description box below. And if you'd like to learn some Laravel, you could check out laracast.com. So big thanks to Jeffrey Way for running this awesome resource. So if you're looking to build your Laravel skills and have a platform to learn from and connect with other people in the community, you can check them out at laracast.com. On the Laravel website, you can check out the community.laravel.com page. So it'll have an in-depth resource of all the meetups that are happening all over the world. So you can check them out. And if you also have an event or a meetup that you want to have posted on the community page, you can check them out and register your event. The Laravel team wants to shine a light on some developers from all parts of the community. So if you're just starting out with Laravel, or if you're building cool things with Laravel, or if you're working quietly behind the scenes about some Laravel stuff, you can check out this page. So laravel.com/stories. The Laravel team wants to highlight people that are creating something that you're proud of. So the community also wants to hear about it. So you can check them out at laravelstories.com, answer some of Taylor's questions, and share your story with the community. Big thanks to our host Vehicle for hosting this meetup. And so if you're looking for a great team of developers to help you with any Laravel work, you can check them out at vehicle.com or email them at go@vehicle.com. And also big thanks to our JetBrains sponsor. We have a giveaway every single meetup, which will be running until November 11th. You can scan that QR code to be entered into a draw to win any IDE 1-year subscription. So check them out by scanning that QR code and enter our draw. And now I'll pass it off to Dan to introduce our speaker for this month.
Thank you, Margaret. Our speaker this month is someone in the community that doesn't really need much of an introduction. If you've been to any Laracon, there's a decent chance you've heard him speak. He is the CEO at Titan, author of Laravel Up and Running, a resource that probably a lot of people have found their way into Laravel through. He's also the host of multiple Laravel podcasts, including the Laravel podcast, as well as the Business of Laravel podcast. And he's been so gracious to join us today and share his experience with something he knows so much about, how to build a productive Laravel team. And without further ado, here he is, Matt Stauffer. How are you doing today?
Great, my friend. How you doing?
Doing really well, thank you. Once again, thank you for joining us. I know you have a very busy schedule, but I think you've got some great insights in your talk today that the community can benefit from here, something you have a lot of experience with. So thank you again for being here with us.
Of course. You want me to get started and share it?
Yeah, let's do it. So go ahead and share your screen, and then Margaret and I will step backstage, and away we go.
All right. Good luck, Matt.
Right.
Thank you so much. Everything look good?
Well, yep. We'll chat with you in a bit. Talk to you then, Matt.
Thanks, y'all. Well, hey, everybody. So this is a talk that I gave at Laravel Live UK a couple of years back as a very casual talk. And most of my talks are very formal and structured. I've worked with my designer and I built out all these slides about, like this is the one. And this was much more just kind of like I wanted to share some ideas. It was like maybe halfway between like a meetup and like a Laracon talk. And I just kind of like threw some content and slides about things I was thinking about, and I shared them. And it went much better than I expected. And from there, I ended up talking about it, really briefly on Laracon stage, making a white paper, I think I actually created the Business of Laravel podcast out of some of these ideas, and then ended up also recording a Laracast course around the same topic. What I've found is that this is something, I spent my first kind of portion of my career teaching people about how to become a Laravel developer. And I was really excited to make that kind of influence in the world. And then I was also excited about making the influence of making a team, a really wonderful team at Titan. But at Titan, I can only make an impact on, 15 to 20 employees at a time. I don't ever want it to get much bigger than that. And so I was thinking, what does it look like for me to be able to hopefully make the type of change in the world that I want, and more broadly? And I was like, well, what if I'm sharing my ideas about what it looks like to build these teams to people outside of Titan's team? And we do that through our work at times. We'll talk about that in a second. But the concept behind this talk and the Laracast course was really just to say, I would like for as many places as possible to be healthy and productive and great for people to work at. And so that was kind of the impetus behind this. So while this is technically a talk, this is really just me kind of dumping some ideas in your brain. If you are a CTO, or if you are running a company, or even if you are not in a leadership position right now, you can either lead up or you can be kind of advocating for these things over time or as you move into leadership positions. So think of this less as a perfect talk and more as a beginning of a conversation. Some of these things I'm just kind of throw stuff at you and you're gonna be like, I'm gonna have to go back and watch that later. That's totally fine. I just want to throw things out in the world. And of course, Laracast course is that as well. Our white paper is that as well. There's lots of other materials out there, but I just want to kind of like set the foundation for this talk being primarily around just rolling a whole bunch of ideas out of my brain into the ether to figure out kind of what sticks. And so if you're like, that's interesting, but you talked about it for 5 seconds, or it was just on a slide briefly, that's totally fine. Hit me up later, ask it in the Q&A, check out the Laracast course, but just kind of like expect this to be a little bit maybe fire hosey, and hopefully that's going to be okay. So without any further ado, let's actually get to the talk itself, how to build a productive Laravel development team. So I want to structure the talk across these things. The context is going to be, what do I mean by a team? Because the team could be a lot of different things. And I want to specifically talk about what team am I talking about, who's on the team, and how do those pieces of the team interact. I want to talk about the constraints, because everybody's team is different. And so some pieces of advice might be helpful for you and not helpful for others. So what defines our team and delineates them against other teams is worth thinking about. So suggestions is the bulk of the talk. It's actually what have I found helpful in the teams I've worked with. And the summary is not going to be nearly as neat as you hope, but I've got to have something at the end. So let's dive into the actual talk. I run a company called Titan, where we build custom web applications for people. And there I built a team that I'm extraordinarily proud of, both the people who work there now and the people who've worked there in the past. But at Titan, we don't just build our own team and then go and build code for other people. We also build teams for our clients, or we help them build their teams. And we have 3 broad categories of client in regard to their teams: the healthy team, the no team, and the unhealthy team. And all of these groups need us to write code for them and teach them how to code better. That is standard across all of them. However, when you get to no team and unhealthy team, they also need help with their teams. So no team helps them. We need to help them hire and build to their team and their process and their project, workflows and everything like that. An unhealthy team needs us to help fix those things, and then sometimes also help hire and build process workflows as well. So we actually spend a lot of time and energy trying to answer these questions for our clients, not just ourselves, of what does it look like to build these productive teams? And I would argue it has to be healthy in order to be productive. So in the moment we're talking about building a productive team, I'm hearing the word healthy behind it. So I'm saying healthy and productive teams. So let's get started with the context, which is, what is a team? And of course, a team can mean a million things. But when I'm talking about a Laravel team, I'm talking about the group of people responsible for building Laravel apps. And at first kind of glance, that might just sound like I'm talking about developers, because we're the ones who are building the apps. But there's more than just developers working on the team of building the app. So we might have programmers, but we also have business, the CEOs and the people who are actually defining what this business is about. We've got product, who take kind of those business ideas and turn them into features and UX and everything like that. We've got design. We've got the people who actually take those product definitions and turn them into UX and UI. We've got development. We actually turn it into code. But then we've also got QA and DevOps and IT. So all these people have roles to play in definition of basically what is the product that we're shipping. And in most companies, especially larger companies, it ends up getting split up into really 2 kind of sub-teams in the team, which is business and engineering. And if you see this and you're like, well, that's not how we're split, great, thank God. because I'm sure that your life is significantly better. But for the majority of us, when we've worked at a large enough space, especially when there's a little bit of conflict, the conflict tends to be between business and engineering. And so for me, when we're talking about a team, we're really talking about business and engineering and their relationships with each other, their relationships with senior leadership, their relationships with the customers, and also all the processes and pieces and workflow that sit between business and engineering. And honestly, the processes that sit between business came up with an idea as step one, and that idea is live on the internet as step infinity, right? So a team means everything, people, systems, processes, whatever, that sit between those two places. So the constraints, it wouldn't be a Matt Stauffer talk if I did not say it depends trademark at some point throughout it. So the constraints are, there are a lot of independent features that will impact the decisions you make, and they'll impact the advice that you should receive and not receive. They'll impact your ability to implement the things I'm talking about, or whether they're actually even relevant. Things like the size of your team, the scale of the projects you're working on, what you already have in place when it comes to technology and structures and processes and people, and also what they're capable of doing. What is your team able to do, and what is their experience? What does it look like to hire full-time versus contract workers in your market? What are some unique constraints of your domain? Are you working on, space flight and NASA and finances, or are you making a social app for dogs? You're not going to have the same constraints in each of those. And deadlines, timelines, pressures, all of these things are going to impact the decisions that you make. They're going to impact the way you implement changes to your team to make them more healthy and more productive. But more important than any of these is people. Now, this could be the moment where I am, doing my little Mr. Rogers moment, and I say, what matters more than anything else is people. And that is true. I believe people are what matter. I believe all those things we just talked about only matter because they apply to people, they affect people. And I believe that a healthy and productive development team is so because we care for the people, right? 100%. However, even more, people are why teams get unhealthy in the first place. People are why teams get set up in a place where it is not good for the other people in the first place. And it is the unique things about people that we need to address and understand and consider in order to help the other people. And I'm talking about things like fear, afraid of being embarrassed, about being exposed as an imposter, or ego, taking inappropriate credit for your work or avoiding good things if you're not the one who came up with the good thing. Emulation, following other people's roles instead of figuring it out on your own, saying, well, AWS did microservices, so even though we only have 2 developers, we should do microservices as well. Or, and this is a spicy one because I'm a consultant, consultants have a tendency to offer one-size-fits-all solutions where that's not actually appropriate, not have a lack of nuance, and give recommendations on things that they've never actually done before. And this leads to people adopting things that aren't actually a good fit for them because some consultant who was paid $50,000 said that you should do it. And probably other stuff, because honestly, we're talking about people, and people are complex. And if we're talking about all the ways that the people are in need and are causing problems or whatever, there's a lot of specific factors that can't be named here. But this is a few of the key ones. So let's dive into some suggestions for how you can build a healthy and productive development team. I have a caveat, which is that because of all those things we just talked about, you may hate my advice. You might be inappropriate for you. For example, you might have 500 developers, and me, who's used to working with a team of 20 and clients who have 50 or 100. If you've got 500, there might be some things I'm saying here that just don't make sense for you. And that's totally fine. Like take it, take what works and throw away what doesn't work. But I would also say that if you find yourself bristling a little bit, maybe just kind of take a breath and say, is it worth me pausing, not immediately throwing things out, but just kind of like taking it all in and saying, is it possible that some of these things are actually potentially valuable for me, but I need to be open to it first? And so I would just ask you to be open, listen, and then if you're like, nope, that's still not for me, totally makes sense. So this is our agenda of the suggestions I'm going to give: how to build a healthy culture, how to structure a dev team, how to hire developers, how to build a product process, and then development process. And this might be familiar to you if you've checked out the first 3 episodes of my Laracast course, because there's a lot of overlap between the two. I'm going to breeze through these topics pretty quickly in the talk. But if you want to see my longer thoughts about this, check out this free Laracast series. It's called How to Build a Dev Team, and it's basically this talk writ large. It's spun out across 2 hours with a lot more work put into it. And they're going to be releasing those bit by bit. The videos are all done, but they're doing amazing editing on them. And so that's just coming out bit by bit. All right. how to build a healthy culture. So, in order to build a healthy culture, you first need to understand what your ideal culture actually looks like. What does healthy look like for you? Because healthy is kind of based on what our values are and what we think is good and bad. But also, it's going to be a little bit unique per environment. Your values might be not my values. Your priorities, your limits. You know, limit is something like no matter what happens, I will never allow a client to do this to you, or no matter what happens, I will never ask you to do what. Everybody's going to have these different, but it is valuable and useful to know what they are for you and your company and to write them down and to communicate them. There's a ton of ways, and we'll talk about some of them, and we won't talk about some of them, but just believe me that understanding what these values, priorities, and limits are is going to be extremely helpful for you in building this healthy culture. And I do want to make a recommendation that, of course, don't do this if it doesn't make sense for you, but I highly would recommend that you consider putting transparent, empathetic communication as one of your values. That the number of times I've been speaking to people in the Business of Laravel podcast, and I say, what has allowed you to get where you are? How you've reached this level of success? And they're basically they reference the book Radical Candor, or they make some other note that suggests the fact that this transparent, empathetic communication is one foundational way they've been able to get there. Okay. So once you define your culture, you want to hire people who embody the values of that culture. You want to bring in people who you say, I know who you are. I understand through this hiring process that you are in sync with my values. You are in sync with what I care about. And that you are a person who can grow, who I can trust that like you are where you are now and you're going to be somewhere further in 6 months, that I can trust you to continue to be that person and I can trust you to do other things. And then because I believe about you that way, I think about you that way, I can now be your biggest supporter. Like it's very important to hire good people who are trustworthy and then trust them, who can learn and then let them learn, who, you know, can do the hard work and then you can support and believe that they're going to do the hard work and support them when somebody's saying they're not doing the hard work. It's this kind of, you are able to be your best management self when the people you have are the people that you can be like, I believe in them, I support them, I know they're doing the right thing. So I would say the first thing you can do, and no other process is going to work if you don't believe in the people you're working with. And this is not a, well, you should just believe harder because maybe you inherited a team and you're like, I don't know about this team, or maybe you didn't know how to hire well. So I would say hiring great people is cornerstone to any other kind of like good management tactic. And of course, you know, I should caveat this before. You may not be the person defining the values of the company. You may not be the person hiring the people. So that's why some of these may or may not be applicable, but I still want you to understand, because you might say, you know what, I thought the problem was, you know, my manager, and it turns out the problem is actually the team. You know, so understanding that these are dynamics that a lead or an owner or a manager should be doing is valuable, even if you're not the person doing these things. Okay. As a person in any form of leadership, it is very important to live out your values. And again, this is something that I'm specifically targeting at leaders, but it's also true for all of us. If we define the values of the company and then we don't follow through with those values, if we don't have the integrity, you know, one of the things I said in the course a lot is it's really easy and fun to talk about how, well, we're a family and I care about you, blah, 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 until things get tight. And then if you kind of fall back on your values or you fall back on your, you know, your priorities, your limits, when it gets difficult to do so, well, then first of all, those values never meant anything in the first place. And second of all, you're not creating a healthy culture. In fact, you're creating a distrustful culture and people are going to get out as soon as they can. And once again, I'm speaking to the people who are in leadership, but this is true to all of you. If I hire somebody because they talk a certain kind of game and then they don't actually show integrity and they don't behave in the ways they say are going to, well, then I no longer trust them. And that's always a concern, but it's especially a concern in remote asynchronous cultures and developer spaces where we're allowing you to directly, you know, interact with our clients, whatever else. Developers, especially remote developers, have a lot of opportunities to do a really good job when not looked at or a really bad job when not looked at. So this trustworthiness and this integrity is really, really vital all throughout our career, all throughout our industry. Okay. So that's obviously not all. Again, take a look at the Laracast for a lot more of those. But some of the most important things for me is to define the values of the company and then to hire people who are going to be in line with that value and then also to personally be in line with those values. So when you have those people, how do you structure the team? What are people's positions? What are their relationships with each other? Well, I strongly believe that the best arrangement possible, regardless of the size of your company, is full stack development teams with between 2 and 4 developers, with the maximum of 1 junior to every 2 non-juniors. Every team needs to have a technical leader and a process leader. They could be the same person if you want. And we need to note this about technical ability not being interpersonal leadership skills. So let's kind of walk through these. I believe that a team larger than 4 developers instantly runs into problems where you have people who are hiding behind somebody else, people who are not doing the work, people who don't always have necessarily the right tasking. The larger you get, the more you run into a lot of those interpersonal issues on a development team. So I strongly recommend these smaller teams as much as possible. And I think they should be full stack. This is personal. I know a lot of people like separated. You got the front end team and the back end team, but the number of problems I see come through when every single feature has to run through 3 different teams or 3 different approval levels and 3 different sets of tests and 3 different testing environments, whatever like that, versus you just have 3 full stack teams, each of which get separate features. It's wild how much process problems and communication problems are solved by having full stack teams instead of tech specific teams. With juniors, I think one thing I see often in these larger teams is people will hire a team of 15 and 6 of them will be juniors or 10 of them will be juniors because they think, yeah, as long as I got a couple leads, they're going to manage these juniors. But again, 3 of the juniors aren't doing anything, right? They're just showing up and getting paid to show up to meetings and talk once in a while so people don't notice it. 3 of the juniors are spending all of their time, all the time the leaders basically reviewing their work and helping them grow. And maybe to the leaders, the juniors are being occasionally effective. But overall, your leads and your senior developers are going to be significantly less valuable because they're going to spend all their time managing juniors. The juniors can't grow because they're not being paid attention to because they're just in a kind of a muddy pool of juniors. This is not the way to set it up. So in my experience, you have at most 1 junior to 2 non-juniors at absolute most. And we've had an apprenticeship program over time and we've kind of tried different scales of it. And I really stand by this one. I do think that your teams need both a technical lead and a process lead. And what I mean here is a technical lead is a senior developer. It is somebody whose development skills are higher than others. And we'll talk about in a second about kind of how I think about those, but somebody who you can look to and say the buck stops with them from a technical perspective, right? This person is doing architecture. This person is doing code review. They are the one who is technically responsible for the code base that we're delivering. And then separately, although it could be the same person, somebody needs to take the responsibility for understanding process, like when are the documents signed and when do we set up the meetings and when do we, flag that something's taking longer than we're going to expect it to, and who's paying attention to, hey, that person's been head down in that project for 3 days and it was supposed to be a 2-hour project or, feature or whatever. There's somebody who's got to take that responsibility. And it is possible for that to be the same person, but that's a lot of context switching. So at Titan, we prioritize having a project manager and a lead developer on every single project. Even though our lead developers do have some interpersonal responsibilities and our PMs are technical, we still kind of just make sure that like the buck stops with you here, the buck stops with you here. And these are not one person who's trying to do all those things at the same time. And finally, technical ability is not the same as interpersonal leadership skills. And I kind of hinted at it here already. But your technical ability as a coder is often where people think that their career progression is going to go from a coding perspective. So I'm a junior developer, and then I'm a mid developer, and then later I'm a senior developer. And so what a lot of leaders do is they say, oh, you're a senior developer. We're going to put you in a leadership position. And that leadership position is expecting not technical leadership, but process or interpersonal leadership. And it's a misconception that because someone has ability in one, that means they have them in the other. And the more common shortcoming here is a technical developer who's reached a senior development skill level being put in a senior interpersonal skill level. That's not always the case. Sometimes it's the other way around. You've got somebody who has great interpersonal abilities, but is not actually a senior developer. And I actually think that's less likely to cause problems, but it is still something you need to be aware of if you're doing. Okay, I want to talk a tiny bit more about technical seniority of the company. So it's important to define the roles that you have, and we'll kind of, again, walk through Titan's roles in just a second. And then with those roles, part of the question about someone's role is their ability to adhere to and enforce a global quality standard, which I'll also talk about in a second. And a senior developer is somebody who's capable, to me, of holding your code up to that quality standard. So what I mean here is, and actually, I'm just going to jump up to the next one. Our roles at Titan are these 3, and these are not our actual roles. We have other roles other than this, and we don't even have a senior as a role. We have lead as a role. But my understanding of people's technical ability falls into one of these 3. You're either a junior, which if we have juniors, they're usually called apprentices. You're either a mid or you're a senior, and our seniors are usually called leads. But from a programming perspective, it really comes down to this. And of course, it can be more nuanced, but it really comes down to, do we need to review your code before it goes live? And if the answer is every time because I'm still learning and I'm kind of stressed and I probably need programming and everything, then you're probably a junior still learning. If your code doesn't necessarily need to always be reviewed, but we should check it on a regular basis, your architecture should be guided. And like in general, you're going to do the job, but we want you to have support systems around you. That's a mid. And if your code doesn't really need to be reviewed, your architecture is trusted, and honestly, you're primarily the person doing review for other people and helping them lead, that's a senior. And that's kind of how our roles break down. So if we look at this right here, we're really saying we've defined those roles. And then not only have we defined the roles, but when we talk about your code can be trusted, we have to be able to say, well, trusted against what? What is the actual standard that we're trusting it against? And we have lots of conversations around code, formatting standards, which that's fine, but that's not actually what I'm talking about right now. I'm talking more about standards when it comes to the entirety of the code base. Like, how is it architected? How long do we spend on things? Are we doing YAGNI? Are we doing heavy architecture and all these things? Those are the spaces where I want to have a global understanding at a company of what good code means. That's really what it is. Like, what does good code look like in our organization? And I need people who can take the responsibility to define that standard, or to apply the standard if it's already defined. And as you see, I mentioned here, if you don't have the ability to find that standard and you're like, I don't know if we can afford to have a senior developer, well, one thing you could do is hire a consultant like Titan or Vehicle, bring us in, and we'll help define that standard for you, and then help teach your programmers to enforce it. And then, you can take us back out. But somebody at some point must have defined the standard, and there needs to be somebody who's responsible for implementing that standard. And that's kind of what I think of as a senior developer. All right. So we talked about structure of the dev team itself. But I want to step a little bit past this. The moment you are an engineering organization, because you're not all working at consultancies, you are a software company. And of course, I'm a software consultancy because I'm a software consultancy. And of course, somebody who says, we're making a tech-based startup, therefore we're a software company. But that applies to other people as well. Let's say you do manufacturing and you now have a software as a service application that is managing your applications. Well, you are now a software company. You might be a manufacturing company that also does software, but a lot of folks in those circumstances think of the software that they build in-house as just being sort of like an implementation detail, and don't realize that they now have the obligation, the responsibility to make sure that code keeps running, it's developed well, and there's a healthy environment around it. And one of the things that you run into frequently in these circumstances is a most senior technical person at the company who's not actually technical, or who's technical but does not actually have leadership power. So you can see here that I'm saying the most senior technical person, whether that's a director of engineering or a VP of engineering or a CTO, whatever else, needs to have experience programming. They need to actually understand the ins and outs and requirements and expectations and difficulties and unique nuances of programming. And they need equal power to the leaders of the business side, of the product side, of the rest of engineering, whatever else it is. And you seldom find both. You usually either find a C-suite person who's called a technical leader and doesn't actually understand programming, or you get a senior programmer who is actually beholden to product or somebody else, and they're kind of at a sub-level. And in order to have a healthy relationship between the engineers and the engineering side of your organization and the product people and the entire business side of the organization, there needs to be somebody who is at the top of the engineering level, who fully understands and empathizes with the engineers, who can speak their language, who can understand when to push back on them and when to kind of go to bat for them, who also can go head to head with the people in leadership and business. That's very valuable and unfortunately very uncommon. Okay, so now let's talk about how to hire developers. So I once again say you should hire full stack developers. And it's very hard to hire if you don't actually know the position you're hiring for. And that sounds very obvious, but I would say it's surprisingly uncommon for people to really have fully defined this role and this role as it's relative to other roles in the organization. And sometimes it's fine, right? Sometimes you're like, well, we're going to put up a generic hiring position and we're going to adapt the role based on the people who apply. Totally fine. But as you find yourself working through applicants, as people decide whether or not they're going to apply for your job, I've also worked with people a lot on the applying side. And as you kind of winnow down who's the right person for it, having pre-existing metrics that you can use to gauge applicants against is extraordinarily valuable for you. And that requires you to actually know, well, what are our metrics in general? And you can have some metrics that are your kind of universal metrics, right? Is this a good person? Did they learn well? All those things. But some of them are going to be relevant to the job they're going to be doing. So as much as possible, you should understand the job you're going to be doing. And now I'm going to once again share one of these unasked for pieces of very specific advice that you can choose to ignore. But my specific advice is, if we're talking about a senior Laravel developer, they need real Laravel experience. The number of times I see someone who is a senior PHP developer apply for a job with almost no knowledge of Laravel and be put in a senior Laravel developer position in a Laravel company with a Laravel code base, and then go through and not understand the idiomatic Laravel way to do things, not understand what Laravel is doing out of the box, and end up rewriting code that should have been written in Laravel stuff, or building new code that doesn't play well with other Laravel tools, and then they get a year down the road and they want to add a Laravel tool and they can't because they wrote this custom stuff because the person didn't understand Laravel. You can be a senior PHP developer and not know Laravel and have to work at a entry or mid-level Laravel position, and you'll get up to senior much faster than somebody else would. But don't hire non-Laravel developers as seniors. It doesn't make sense. Don't do it. Whoops, sorry. So once we've defined this position, once we've started thinking through what we want them to do, we want to put it on Layer Jobs. We want to write job postings and then also technical interviews that test for real practical things that people will do. We're not testing for linked lists on whiteboards and leak code and all that kind of crap. You want to test that someone is capable of doing the job that you're hiring them for. And remember, we have defined this job really well, right? We've said what you're going to do. So now we need to write interview challenges and questions that test their ability to do that job, not some theoretical, ideal programmer job, but like the actual thing. So pull real challenges that your programmers have run into your interview questions. Say, you know what, last week it got stuck on this particular thing. Great, let's put it there. I had a server that was running out of space, but it had plenty of space, and it turns out it was the inodes or something like that. I threw that crap on the interview like immediately afterwards because I'm like, if I'm struggling with it, it will tell me a lot about you if you know this kind of thing, right? People can't always write code on the spot, but they can always read it. There's an ongoing question about, what's the best way to test people's ability to code when we know that, interviews are not exactly the right moment for asking somebody to write code when they necessarily don't have their IDE, they don't have Stack Overflow, they're really stressed, But the thing is, I've found that while that is true, people can read code live, no question, especially people with more experience. And so rather than saying, hey, go write me a piece of code that does this, I say, hey, here's a piece of code. Tell me what's wrong with it, or tell me what it does, or tell me how to refactor it. And they don't even, sometimes they'll refactor it in code, but sometimes they'll just be able to say it out loud. That is something we can all do significantly better than we can actually write code live. And I also would recommend that one of the issues that we see run into is that folks who are trying to build more robust hiring practices, unfortunately, end up with someone going through, 12 interviews with all sorts of different people across the company, and then they don't get the job. And they're like, I just spent, 15 hours working on you guys, and then you gave me nothing. Like, it's kind of a bummer. Pro tip there, have more than one interview on the call at the same time. First of all, you're saving everybody a little bit of time in their interview process. You can have less experienced interviewers watching more experienced interviewers and learning how to interview from them. And also, as one person asks a question and is listening intently to somebody's answer, another person can be working on planning the next question rather than somebody having to juggle listening to somebody's answer and planning what they're doing next. So big fan of more than one interview at a time. One thing I've been asked recently is how to modify this slide and this advice given AI. And I have to be very, very, very transparent. I have not hired a developer since all these AI cheating tools have come along, but I've watched many videos and had many conversations with people about what it looks like to do so. And my best understanding is that will allow somebody to get through a relatively generic coding screen pretty well. But if you are if you're sensitive to how people interact, like for example, if someone was just telling me a story about how they would ask a question and then somebody would look up at the corner for 5 seconds and then they would, with their eyes scrolling across the screen, read off the absolute perfect answer. Like if you're being a person and really paying attention to people, you're gonna solve those problems the majority of the time. I can't say perfectly because I haven't done it, so I will just tell you right now. Next time I have to go through it, because we have two different types of hiring. We do the hiring where we hire people we already have connections to, and then at least every few hiring rounds, I'd like to actually go through a traditional hiring round where we've got 500 applicants and we're processing through resumes and stuff like that. And the next time we do one of those, I'm going to share with the world my experiences, my thoughts, my notes about counteracting AI cheating. But in the end, I think the more you pay attention to people as people, the better off you're going to be.
Hey, Matt, Dan here. Sorry, I think we touched on this before. You said there's some once in a while your camera there's an issue.
The thing.
We're just seeing a black screen at the moment. We can still hear you.
No, thanks for the heads up.
No problem.
All right, I'm gonna quit out of the slide share real quick so I can tell the thing.
There he is. You're back.
Am I back? Okay,
you're
great.
Back.
Thank you so much for letting me know.
No problem. Keep it up. Loving it.
Appreciate it. All right. So let's catch back up to where we were. Okay, so we are now on to our second to last segment, which is how to build product process. So for me, from my perspective, there are two types of processes that we're building to have a productive team. And both of these assume you have your team, right? Like we now have our people here, they're hired, they're set up, they know what their roles are. And now we want to build the systems that allow them to be healthy and productive. I think that they fall into two large categories. One of them is product or project definition or tasks. Basically like what are we doing? What is the definition of done? Who's being assigned what? And then the second one is development process, which is very specific to how we write code and everything. So from a product process perspective, everything starts from being handed off feature specs, and this is where often things can get off to the right or the wrong foot depending on how we handle it. So the first thing is, I would say, massive spec docs, where the business sits down and they spend 3 months planning something that ends up being 40 pages long, and they just kind of throw it over a wall to you and say, build this. There are so many ways that can end up biting us in the butt. There's so many ways where we say, well, we wouldn't have done it that way, or, oh my gosh, how are we not involved in this process? And, we can talk about these in a sec about defining features collaboratively, but there's a pretty easy answer to that, which is just to trim down the scope of what you're defining at any given moment. As much as possible, try to understand that there is a broad scope of what we're building, and we want to chunk that scope up into pieces. And you can call them epics or whatever else you want, but understand what they are, and then take the first one and define it narrowly, define it specifically, define it, extensively. And that already gets you significantly down the road of starting to move towards a more iterative, more agile way of working, which I'm a big fan of. And one of the things that you should do with that is work on collaborative definition of those features. And like I said, the most common workplace is workflow is that business develops something, they work with product, they often work with design, and then they throw it over the wall to engineering and say, all right, go build this. Tell us how long it's going to take to build it. And if you build it and it takes any longer than your estimate, then you're in trouble, right? Like that's the most common workflow. But that's not actually the ideal way of working. And there's so many different ways for that, in part because the developers don't understand it, because they weren't able to weigh on it. But like, think about if you say, well, we want to do this thing, and the developers understand that there's two different ways to do this thing. And one of them is going to take 20% of the time, and one of them is to take 100% of the time. And both of them have similar values. Well, the developer should be there in that definition process saying, hold on, before we take the assumption that we're building this way, and then spend the next, 30 pages of definition basing things off of that, let's have this conversation around what's the best way to build this. Can we do the 20% way? And the answer is not always yes, but like you can't have figured that out and then kind of taken the angles or the directions you're going to go from there based on that, unless the developers were there in the first place. And by the time it's been bundled up and signed off on, and the business people are moving on to some completely unrelated section of their life, and then the developers see it and kind of raise their hands, at that point, the developers are annoying, right? Like, why don't you just do what we told you to do? Whereas if this is collaborative process, not only are developers having a better time, doing what they're doing, but the business gets more value in less time with more efficacy if you trust that the engineers are capable of weighing in meaningfully towards the definition of what we're going to be doing. And there are times when I can look at it and say, well, it's because they don't respect us, right? Like they don't respect us and they don't think we're important. They don't think we have good thoughts. And unfortunately, that is the case often. But I think it's also often because we do not know how to make the case to business that we should be involved and speak their language about the benefits to them of our involvement. Right. So if we just say, we need to work on technical debt because it matters to us. Well, who cares? If we need to work on technical debt because that's going to avoid us getting hacked and be in the front page of the New York Times next week, all of a sudden that's speaking business's language. Right. So in the moments where we're trying to build these kind of like interweaving moments of business and engineering working together, for example, collaborative definition of features, it's really valuable for engineers to be able to speak the language and the values of business folks. And so to do so here, again, I would say, tell them about how much better we can come up with a scope that we can work with and deliver, valuable, quick, scalable, effective, whatever else like that work if we're a part of this definition process up front. And then once we do have that, I would say the more senior developers / the product people / the project folks do have the ability to define tasks in ways that are easier or harder for developers to pick up. And so I would say give them well fleshed out tasks with immediate access to business for clarification and or leeway to interpret tasks themselves. I think that's the best type of task, is if we have a task that says, here's what you need to do with enough. And I know that enough is very, it's wishy-washy, but enough work that and you'll learn kind of what your team needs, but also minimize the friction between getting a task delivered to you and then to be able to clarify it, or just say, hey, I'm going to make these assumptions because I'm a smart human being. And then when I deliver it, if you tell me I clarified myself wrong, that's fine. The goal here is to avoid developers being stuck, constantly having to go back asking for questions or having to deliver work without access to clarification and then being chided for not doing it the right way as if they could read somebody else's mind. We want collaboration in the initial definition process, but we also want collaboration here in the actual acting process. When I'm tasked with a thing, I should have the space to be a collaborative in the other direction, right? I should be able to ask you, hey, well, can you help me answer this particular question if I do this or that? Like, we want access to business people while we're developing as well. And so I do have a lot of ideas around, once those tasks are defined, what it looks like for us to actually task folks. And you will be unsurprised if you ever heard one of my talks that one of the main things I'm going to talk about here is Agile, agility, Kanban. So essentially, what I'm talking about here is and I'm trying not to re-say the same thing I say in every talk, but if you never heard it before, there's something called Agile, capital A, trademark after it, got a briefcase and some stock photos behind it. That is an entire industry built around basically taking a very flexible and radical and simple idea called the Agile Manifesto and some of the ideas behind it, and turning it into a ecosystem of paid consultants and books and complexity. I don't like Agile. I don't like Scrum. I don't think they're helpful. I don't think they're valuable. I think they benefit consultants and nobody else. Agile is brilliant. Kanban, chef's kiss. These tools allow us to receive the benefits of the plans for agility brought about by the Agile Manifesto, the plans for how to be flexible and focus on people over processes, and how to be iterative and how to be agile. I mean, if you think about like an athlete being agile, it doesn't mean that they have a giant agile trademark banner on the back of their thing that somebody paid them $500 for. It means when a new challenge comes that's something different than we're expecting, they dodge, right? If there's a ball coming this way and I'm agile, I just kind of move out of the way of the ball. Agile just means being able to be on your toes, to stay responsive to what's in front of you, to be able to kind of change, your tack more easily. And that applies for us as well from a development perspective. Agile's one of its core concepts is doing small pieces of work and then reevaluating what you should do next, and then doing small pieces of work and then reevaluating what you do next, and just doing that over and over and over again. And you can see how this lines up with what I was saying before about the 40-page spec document. How do you agilely work your way through a 40-page spec document when somebody who doesn't even understand programming has defined what your next 2 years of work is supposed to look like? So we want to say, let's pick up the most important thing we can do right now, do the best work we can on it, and just do that process over and over and over again. And if you're not familiar, Kanban is basically the structure that describes tools like Trello. Kanban is essentially just lists of cards, and each card can be moved up and down in the list. It can have details, it can be assigned to a certain person, and it can be moved between lists. And so the most common way of doing Kanban is you basically have a to-do, doing, and done list, and you can add many other lists, but everything's kind of founded around that idea. And if you just think about how simple that is, if you're used to Jira or Scrums or anything like that, where you can pick it, but it has to be a part of the sprint. But what happens if I'm not done with the end of the sprint? Or what happens if I finish it before? Well, I can't pick up an extra item at the end of the sprint because I wouldn't want to only be halfway done because of the sprint. So then the last 2 days of the sprint, I'm just not doing anything. Like, there's all these systems that get in the way of people just being productive. Whereas with Kanban, what you're literally saying is, what's the most important thing for me to work on? And then I'm going to start working on it. I'm going to leave notes on my work. And then I'm going to say, hey, I'm done. And now I'm going to do the next thing and just do that over and over and over again. And I do mention here that more cards is better because one of the things I often see folks run into when they're doing Kanban is each card is going to take them 2 weeks. Well, seeing movement is valuable. And if you can't move your card, at least leave notes in your card about the movement you're doing. But it's better to be able to move cards as often as possible. Oh, I rewrote this one last night, and I was feeling a little spicy on this one. I don't think I would normally have left this in, but I call it Care for Your Kids. And it was really just, I love my children. And one of the things that's hard for me is not to just kind of always choose exactly what they're doing and set everything up perfectly for them. And one of the lessons I'm learning right now, especially as they are at their current ages, 9 to 13, is that in order to help them be the best people they can be, I need to encourage them to be independent, encourage them to have autonomy, and encourage them to make their own decisions, allow them to fail at times, but have them safe space for all that. And there's a lot of parallels between having kids and having employees. there's a lot of parallels between my old job, doing, nonprofit work and having employees. It's because if I'm caring for people and I'm trying to set them up in a way where they're able to do these things on their own, then I want to build structures in this agility and in other things, structures where they have the ability to make the decision. And if you're familiar with Montessori, I see a lot of parallels with Montessori and agile, Kanban type agile, because it's just very empowering. It's not, well, you need a scrum master to decide what you're allowed to do at any given moment. It's just sort of like, hey, you're a big boy or a big girl. You understand what's on your plate. You understand what the work is to be done. So go pick something up, do a great job on it, and just do that over and over again. Okay, how to build development process. The goal of any development tool, any development process, any development framework is to enable developers to write and deploy good code. And good could mean lots of things. It can mean that it's scalable, secure, profitable, whatever. But in the end, whatever the definition of good is, it should enable them to do so. And it's interesting because a lot of folks, when they're building development processes, will add a lot of layers on top of what good is that match their particular values. But in the end, it's sort of like if it meets the bare minimum of what good means for this company, and good could mean passes SOC 2 because we're a government agency, or it could be allows my 5 friends who I'm going to ask for an initial investment to use it. Like good can mean a lot of different things, but as long as it meets that, it doesn't need to go any further above there. And a lot of development processes sort of imagine that every single line of code or every single piece of process needs to establish, well, what if one day this code gets sent to the moon? Or what if one day, it gets a government audit? Like, no, good means the simplest possible thing that can allow us to accomplish the goals of our business in this particular moment. So if there's any processes that we have that are not enabling developers to write and deploy good code, it's not actually a good process. So I would say a lot of development processes, and this kind of lines up with the Agile stuff as well, that are valuable are building an environment so that our developers can focus on coding as much as possible. And a lot of this comes down to protecting flow state. The number one kind of thing that I say that we did different from day one about developers is understanding that they sit down and write uninterrupted code as much as possible. That is a way to get good code. And so if that's the case, well, then I guess I necessarily need a project manager, because otherwise every single time something comes up to the client, the developer has to be the one talking about it. Or let's say we do, daily stand-ups, which is really popular, especially when I got started. Daily stand-ups, and then we got sprint meetings, and then retrospective meetings. And then, of course, every time we have an architecture change, we need to bring the entire team of 15 onto the call. Like the amount of work those folks actually get done in those kind of environments is quite a bummer. So we want as much as possible to protect the ability for developers to show up in the morning and to work on the same thing as long as possible, because that is very valuable for them getting effective work done. And just like we mentioned before, we want to, take care of your kids. We want to empower them. We want to set up situations where they believe that they're not just order takers who sit down and say, oh, well, knock off these 4 tickets and then do it. But we want to empower them to do what's best for the client in that moment. So is this developer trusted? Do they understand what that quality standard is and know that they have the power to be able to make decisions to get them towards that quality standard? Do they understand the processes they're supposed to work from? And even things like, are they operating out of fear? Like all these things contribute towards, am I as a developer empowered to do the best job I can, to make the best decisions I can, to write the best code I can in this moment for this client? And anything we're doing that does not enable them to do that is instead taking away their ability to do so, which means you need more micromanagement, you need more oppressive processes, you need more structures that are not valuable for the individual developer's productivity. And then we already talked about this in the Agile stuff: work iteratively, ship early and often. One of the things that I see very, very, very common that gets in the way of developer productivity is paper cuts. It's just things that waste time. We have a client that we've been working with lately is on Microsoft Teams, and literally the amount of money this client has wasted paying Titan for our developers to have to log out of Microsoft Teams and log back into Microsoft Teams again because it breaks multiple times a day for every single developer who's working on it. I'm like, y'all could switch to Slack and probably save tens of thousands of dollars. Probably, right? That's just one example. So here's a couple other examples. The longer your tests take to run, the more time you've got folks who are in that XKCD comic where they are, saying, what are you doing? Why are you, playing this game out in the hallway? Oh, well, the tests are running. You definitely want tests that not only run fast so they don't go do other things, but that run fast so that they actually run them. You want to upgrade all your dependencies. The more out of date your dependencies are, the more security issues you might run into. Also, the longer it's going to take for you to upgrade your dependencies next time you actually upgrade them. You want your CI/CD to run fast. It doesn't have to run quite as fast as your local tests do, because it's not getting run every single time somebody commits new code. But it's got to run before you merge. And so we don't want people to say, oh, well, I pushed up that pull request and now I just have to waste time and get distracted and lose my flow for the next 15 minutes while I wait for CI/CD to run. You want to merge PRs as quickly as possible. This is true because you want people to actually remember what they were writing when they are interacting with the PR that gave PR notes. But also because the longer a PR sits open, the longer a branch sits open. And that branch sitting open longer means it's much more likely to have merge conflicts because what other branches have been merged in the interim. So the faster you can go from branch, feature written, branch merged back in, the better you're off in a lot of different ways. And allocate time for code quality improvements. Technical debt is a real concern, and it is often treated as being a nicety for developers because we're a bunch of nerds who want to have the latest, shiniest thing. And we are nerds, and we do want the latest, shiniest thing. But technical debt specifically is a concern because it is a way in which our ability to do effective coding gets minimized and slowed down over time as our code that it's founded on gets older and older. And then you also start running into, again, security and infrastructure issues as well. So speaking of the fact that we are nerds and we like shiny objects, you do need to protect against developers' bad habits. Just because a lot of this is around developers being protected and given a healthy working space doesn't mean that we aren't often the source of our own problems. And the number one source is shiny object syndrome, which is I watched a Lyricast where they talked about this and now I want to put it in. Or some popular influencer on the internet is putting all their stuff up to PHP stand level 10 and so I want to put it on ours, or DDD, or whatever else are the latest things that I want to put it in there. Just because it's new doesn't mean that you need it in your application. It doesn't mean you don't, but watch out for the fact that we're curious people, we're inventors, we want to try new things, right? And those things that we're talking about that we're interested in are probably good. They're not all good, but they're probably good. And they're probably good in a context. I had a great conversation online about, and I was teasing Nuno about the PHP stand level 10 thing, but there are code bases where that's a great fit. But just because a brilliant, respected, wonderful person is using it on the internet doesn't mean it's a fit for you in this moment, right? And so that's the thing that we need to watch out for, and we can help train our developers in understanding how to watch out for that. This is one that I already mentioned earlier, but it doesn't only happen with senior PHP developers. Watch out for the idea that a developer thinks that they know better than the framework. If you've got a developer who's constantly saying, "Oh yeah, well Laravel says that, but blah blah blah," or "Well, this is what most of the Laravel community does, but blah blah blah," that doesn't mean they're necessarily wrong, but that's a smell, right? Watch out for the idea that they know better than the framework, because usually the outcome of that is you've got somebody who's going to build something that only they can maintain. It's not as secure or effective as the thing that was actually there in the first place. And now, if they ever want to leave, or you want them to leave or anything like that, you're now stuck with this code. Also, that code is not going to play nicely with future Laravel things that come down the road. It's probably not going to even play nicely with current Laravel things that you haven't needed an excuse to touch yet. So watch out for somebody who thinks they know better than the framework. And that lines up very well with beware the brilliant asshole. The number of company cultures that have that 10x developer, and that 10x developer is the one who everybody looks up to and they do all this kind of work, but they're a jerk. They keep you from hiring anybody who's not just like that person. And honestly, you usually have to build just kind of a little protective wall around them because you want their output, but you don't want people to have to deal with them. And then again, what happens when they leave, or if you disagree with something they're doing, that person's not the person for you. You don't actually want to have that person. Let them go run their own company and let people opt into working there, but you are not going to be benefiting your team if you're bringing on the brilliant asshole. And if you've already found that you already have them, I'm not going to tell you to fire people, but I'm not going to tell you not to either. And finally, your code should not be a special snowflake. These last three are all kind of related. There's a certain personality type of developer that I want you to be careful of. And this is something we are all beholden to at times, but it's most common with somebody who thinks that they're a little bit better than everybody else. I should not be able to identify who wrote a line of code because they write a certain way. And this can be solved usually just by code formatting, right? We just have the idea of, we have an automated code formatter that runs on everybody's code. But still, if you're noticing that all the code that comes from this person is looking a very specific way, and even against like kind of the notes from their leadership team, we kind of want to work with them to say, hey, look, the goal here is to write great code that works together and anybody can take over at any point, not for you to make your mark on the world, right? Go create an open source package to do that or something. Getting towards the end here, we do want to simplify pushing in production. So any steps that we can take that get us from code is written to code is in the internet as fast as possible, those are things that are going to significantly minimize the cost to write and deploy code, right? Because if I write my code and now it's going to take forever to actually get it live, that's rough. So automate the code linting, automate your deploys. When we say CI/CD, CI is continuous integration, which usually runs tests and linting, and then CD is continuous deploy. Now, you don't have to do the type of continuous deploy where you deploy an instance of your app, every 5 minutes or 3 times an hour. Like, that's cool. Some people do that. You don't have to do that. But when it is time to merge, automate the process from you saying, yes, let's merge, let's deploy, and it actually be deploy and have it run as quickly as possible. Because just like I was saying before, if you spend time waiting on your tests, if you spend time waiting on your continuous integration, if you spend time waiting your deploys, that's wasted time, that's wasted energy, that's loss of flow state, but also it just means that more things can go wrong in between. I would say the best way to do this, to automate your deploys, is to deploy by code merges using something like Forge or Envoy, so that you deploy by basically saying we merge into main and then it's out of our hands. It just goes and runs and does the thing. And I highly recommend doing that at least once a week. Just like long-lived branches, long-lived deploys where you only deploy once a month, that runs into so many potential issues, and you get further and further down to the road to every time we deploy, we've got to shut the whole company down for a day because we're all terrified of what's going to happen. The more frequently you deploy, the less terrified you are of deploys actually happening. All right, the imperfect summary. How to build healthy and productive teams? By working really hard for it. There is not a single answer here, right? There's not some just perfect, if you follow these 3 bullet points, you're going to have that. And it takes active, empathetic, informed, flexible, communicative leadership to build a productive team of any size. There is no magic bullet. Even if you were to implement every single thing that I said in this talk, you worked through all of the fire hose, it's still not all the answers, but they're all things that are moving in the right direction. So it's up to you as an owner. It's up to you as a CTO. It's up to you as a technical lead. Honestly, it's even up to you as a programmer. Again, you can lead up. You can look for leadership possibilities. It's up to you to make these decisions to move towards healthy and productive development teams. If you're interested in learning more, other than the Q&A we're going to do here, I've got my Laracast course, How to Build a Dev Team. John Drexler gave a great talk called Building High Trust Environments at Laracon. And also you can sign up for my newsletter or check out Titan.com if you need somebody to help you with this kind of stuff. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you very much, Matt. It was excellent as always. A lot of knowledge you've gained over the years that I think is very valuable to a lot of people. So thank you once again for sharing your thoughts with us.
Thank you.
Yeah, always so insightful, and it's so interesting. I mean, there's just so many things to learn, and it's always an environment where there's always so many things to learn. And so the more you learn, the more perspective you have. And so learning all these things, just even having you explain these things, I feel like it was awesome. So thanks so much, Matt. Really appreciated that.
I really appreciate it.
Generic question I have, Matt. I think like a lot of the advice and things you talked about, I think you take the word Laravel out of them, they probably still apply, right? But in your experience, are there things specific to knowing that you're building a Laravel team that you think might differ from if you're building a Rails team or a React team?
Yeah, I would say the simplest answer is that anybody who's building with full stack frameworks is going to have a different setup than people who aren't. So Rails might be the same, React would not be the same. Full stack developer means something very different in our world than it does in most places. In most places, a full stack developer is just a generalist who can't do anything the whole way through. Whereas in our world, a full stack developer can take an idea from idea to fruition on their own and push it to production. And that's something very special about us and Rails and other full stack frameworks. So I would say that's probably one of the primary ones. Additionally, any of the notes that I gave about like a full senior PHP developer versus a senior Laravel developer, you don't get a lot of people who are senior level JavaScript developers who don't understand Node, or senior level Rails or Ruby developers who don't understand Rails. So we have PHP as a long running language with a lot of other frameworks in a way that a lot of other people don't. And so that kind of makes an impact on who you're hiring and what their experience level can be. You can be a senior WordPress or Cake PHP or Zen PHP or whatever else developer and not understand Laravel in the whole way, in a way that I don't think they probably have those issues in the Rails world or .NET or anything like that.
That's a good point. And then actually I did have kind of a question about a clarity in the one thing you'd said a few times there about hiring full stack devs. And I think, correct me if I'm wrong, that kind of applies in the context of Laravel, certainly. And from what you said, the advantage, or maybe I could ask you, why do I want to hire a full stack dev as opposed to?
Well, there's two things. First of all, I think we should have full stack teams. So I think that even if a team has a more front end or more back end person, the features should be assigned at one given moment to people who are collaborating together on a regular basis in each other's spaces, who have a knowledge of the whole thing. And the easiest way to do that is if each of those developers are full stack, period. But even if they are not operating as full stack developers, meaning people who understand the front end and the back end relatively equally. And that doesn't mean they don't specialize in front end or specialize in back end or whatever, but at least they have a pretty good, professional level understanding of both. They are going to do better on distributed teams, because if I am on a back end team, but I write React, I understand the needs, requirements, expectations of the React team significantly better than if I'm a back-end nerd who's like, why are they always asking for blah, blah, blah? And, you want people who understand the full thing, even if you're not able to put them in a place where they can't understand the whole thing.
That's a really good point. Yeah, definitely see that.
I am curious, do you have a preference, Matt, when building a team? I know we're kind of been used to this remote world. Do you have preference over remote or in person? Do you try to make like a hybrid when building these teams out? I'm curious your thoughts on that.
Yeah. So at Titan, we're remote, and we've been remote since the very beginning. So for us, the reason we were remote, honestly, it's not very beginning. Dan and I were in the same co-working space, and our first two hires were in Chicago, and they would come in every once in a while. So we were already hybrid, I guess. But I moved to Atlanta, I moved to Gainesville at the time, Gainesville, Florida. And we wanted to keep going. And it's sort of like, well, we could require that we're in person, but honestly, how many of the things that we're doing require us to be in the same physical space? And the main thing was social stuff. And so we worked really hard to kind of build social interactions into the life of the company so that people could still feel connected. And it's certainly more work, but there's also just incredible benefit to the lives of the family. Like, that's really the thing. Is like, the remote work is so much better for us as people. Can we as companies kind of make that viable for people? I've had folks leave Titan because they're like, I love Titan, but I would like to be in person. I'm like, yeah, not every job or every person should be remote. And we also know companies where, for one reason or another, I don't think they're usually actually true external constraints. I think they're usually personality things, which is fine. They've decided that they want to be in-person team, and I fully support that, right? Like, one of our biggest clients that we talk about a lot is Sweetwater. Everybody's in person at Sweetwater. One of the reasons they hired, so Titan was the first consultancy they worked at, and the reason they don't normally work with consultancies is because they want everybody in person. One of the reasons they hired us, they're like, we can only hire so many Laravel developers in Fort Wayne, Indiana at a time, and we need more than we have. And they're like, we're really nervous because we're not sure if we can trust outside folks. Well, we just can only bring so many people in person. And there's something really lovely about the fact that they all are together in person. And I mean, Sweetwater is especially cool because they're like, they have a campus there where they've got a doctor and they've got a video rental place, and they've got a little slide you can go down, and all that stuff's run by Laravel. So that's fun, right? And that's something that we don't have at Titan that I appreciate for them. So there's no one universal answer, but I do think that if I had to take a strong statement, it would be that I think that the preference should be remote unless there's a reason not to be, because it just makes so many more opportunities for the individuals. But then also, I can, and I wish I could name every wonderful person who's ever worked at Titan, but just one random person. Logan Hansen is one of the smartest people I've ever met in my entire life. Nobody knows who Logan Hansen is because he's not on the internet. He's not on Twitter. Like, he's just this like super, but anybody who's worked at Titan is like, yeah, I remember Logan. And he lives in the middle of nowhere, Texas, because he wants to be with his family, right? I never would have gotten Logan Hansen if I did not have the willingness to bring somebody who lives in middle of nowhere, Texas. And I'm so glad that we did.
Yeah, that's awesome. I definitely think there's a lot of pros to working remotely and building a team, but there are definitely some differences in the two. But no, I think that's awesome. And then I also had another question about communication. I know you mentioned stuff like using Kanban. I feel like that's also a really great resource to be able to work collaboratively. Would there be any tools that you would specifically prefer for when it comes to communication, or that you thought worked really well working with teams and building teams?
Yeah, so Slack, GitHub, and Trello are the answer. And I used to be much more flexible. And of course, if our clients use other tools, we'll join the other tools. That's fine. Like I said, we have a team who's been living in Teams. We use Bitbucket and Jira and Confluence and all these different things all the time, but it's never as good. And I always thought of it as, this just is probably like a personal preference kind of thing, right? Like GitLab's probably fine, Bitbucket's probably, but they're not. They're not as good in many meaningful ways. And I have yet to have an experience with Jira, Confluence, Teams. I'm trying to think about what else I hate. GitLab, Bitbucket, where I'm not frustrated in some way or form because there are ways that the tools that we use are built around our way of being, and those tools are not built that way. Now, Teams sucks just because it sucks. It's just a bad tool. GitLab and Bitbucket aren't bad tools, but they're built with different mindsets, right? They're built for more enterprisey things. Or like, for example, GitHub are the people who primarily turn the pull request into what it is. They didn't fully invent it, but they basically invented. There's a concept called merge request before, but GitHub really built the visual representation of a pull request that we have today. So yeah, GitLab and Bitbucket have come along and kind of made versions of it, and that's totally fine. And again, if I was forced to use Bitbucket every day, it'd be fine. But I'm just like, but it's not just fine on GitHub. It's actually great on GitHub. Similar with Slack. Like we have used so many chat programs over the years, and we would have to build our own custom bots and custom integrations. And then Slack came along and we're like, it's just all built in. It's just there. So yeah, Trello is not the perfect application, but it's more perfect than Jira. I can say that. So it's just sort of like we have our ways of working. And I just find that, for example, Jira makes it an incredible amount of work to do simple Kanban. The Teams, you're dealing with logging in and out all the freaking time. And so I'm just like, we have this very smooth workflow, and it doesn't just work for us, it works for our clients when they're willing to. So yeah, that's my preferred medium.
Yeah,
and I
like
like Zoom. I know everybody loves Tuple. Tuple's super cool. I know the guys who created Tuple. I fully support it, but I'm just like, I use Zoom every day for business, and then I use Zoom for pair programming. And so I'm just like, I'm a big fan of Zoom, but I wouldn't tell anybody not to use other video chat platforms. I just have to really like Zoom.
Yeah, I feel like it very closely aligns with what you were saying about lowercase a agile. Like as time goes by and new things will come up, and having that open mind to kind of adjust as things see fit and new things come up, I think it's awesome that following that kind of mindset, I think is really awesome.
I had a question, Matt, about specifically sort of like from a consultancy angle and working with teams. And I think Titan is similar in vehicle in that we have our teams internally, but we're working with clients, and there's different types of engagements with clients. Sometimes our teams are a little more autonomous. The client's giving us a project and be like, hey, work on this project, and we're not as much interacting with their dev teams. And sometimes we're just an extension of their team, right?
Yeah.
But there are some times though, you build your own values and process internally, but then sometimes you work with a client and their values or process might conflict with yours a bit. Do you have any kind of general advice for how to approach that?
Yeah. My general approach is, as long as my developers are feeling comfortable, respected, honored as experts and individuals, and they're able to not all of a sudden not be able to pick their kids up from school or whatever, like as long as it's not negatively impacting their lives, I really don't care. It's frustrating to have to waste a whole bunch of time on Teams, and we kind of roll our eyes and then we just do it. It's frustrating. Like, for example, we're very Yagni. We're very much about keeping things as simple as possible. And so, yeah, if we're going to work with a client and they're like, I need DTOs and doc blocks and DDD and blah, blah, blah. I'm like, you're wasting your time, but whatever, like that's more my opinion than my requirement, right? If you want to do all that stuff and you believe that that's delivering value, then we'll bring that value to you all day long. So I would say the two things that are actually like a concern for me if somebody asks us to adopt their culture is, number one, if it's actually damaging the lives of our employees, if they are being asked to work extra hours or something like that's an actual problem for me. And we talk about limits. My limits are, if you're DMing my developers and telling them they have to work extra time, or if you're stressing them out, making feel like they're not doing a good enough job or whatever, then we have a problem. Shoot, I had two and I forget it. But that was the main one. The main one is that basically if they're kind of like getting into their lives and like making their lives worse. Oh, the other thing is, and this is not a problem, but I just got to name it because I want to honor my team. Our team gets really frustrated if three. So that's the first one. The second one is if their expertise is not honored. If we're in a place where we're being brought in as experts who understand things, and our opinions and our preferences are constantly being discarded as if we don't know what we're doing and we're just butts in seats, we're just being paid to be here, that is a big concern for me. And I do not like a place where my developers are disrespected and where they're made to feel like all they're here for is just to be kind of like fingers on keyboards. I'm like, you can hire somebody else to do that. We're here because we know what we're talking about, and we don't want to be arrogant, but we don't want to be, just being mistreated. And then the third one is, and this is a little bit more frustrating for my team, is if they do a whole bunch of work and then because of issues that are on the client side, that work gets thrown away. And this is the one where I'm saying, we're not going to not work with you again or discipline you as a client or something like that. But it's a bummer. It's a bummer for our team to feel like they really just worked really hard to build something that they're really proud of, and then it gets thrown away. So that's not, that's a bummer more than anything else. So
yeah, you definitely want to see your work make it into production, right? For
Yeah.
sure. Yeah, I think what you were saying there definitely connects with Jake's earlier comment here about the equal power thing is so key. I've had frustrating times when the business side doesn't trust senior devs and still treats the devs as implementers, and it's rough. I think that's totally true, and I think Liam had a similar comment here. I think that's the thing I've seen the most companies not realizing. They actually have a big engineering department that needs to run as a software company, right? And it's sometimes the thought that the business is the software is just the UI to the business, and really the business is doing all the business work. And no, it's both, right? Yeah, definitely. Yeah, you are a software company now. I think is really good advice sometimes.
Definitely. I saw on the comments here from Martin. Sorry, Dan, I can't get that up on the screen. But I guess thinking on the opposite side of things, I guess this could be a whole other talk, building a Laravel team. But now with Martin's question, I guess, as a developer, I guess what he's saying here is, how do you find the right team as a developer, I guess?
Yeah. I mean, one of the keys to find, because he's got two parts of his question. How do you find the team? How do you get hired? Finding the team, I would say, talk to the people on the team. If you're considering working at a company, go find the direct contact information. And, that happens all the time. I'll hire somebody and then somebody like, oh yeah, I talked to these 3 people on your team long before I considered applying for a job for you. And this is even more common for us when we find somebody who is a part of a not traditionally represented in tech people group. Like I would say probably every woman who's ever applied to Titan probably reached out to some woman who worked at Titan and be like, hey, is this safe? So that's the first thing, is just reach out and see if they like their job. Like there's no downside to doing that. From how to stand out, there's a Jeffrey Way just put out a 20-minute long video on his Twitter that I would definitely recommend about how to get hired. But I would say, so we get 400 to 500 applicants. I mean, Dave Hickings in the chat, and Dave kind of did this when he worked at Titan. First thing we do is try to figure out how to get that down to 50. And so we're going to read through, and make sure, are you a real person? Are you just an offshore shop that's applying to a job? Gone. I'll put things in the job description that says, make sure you mention an aardvark. If you didn't mention aardvark, gone, right? So like do the bare minimum and you're already getting yourself pretty high up the stack. Beyond that, I want to believe that you're not just applying to 500 jobs and I'm one of 500. And that might be arrogant of me, but like, I want somebody who actually is excited, because as an employer, while I'm going through 500 people, when I eventually offer somebody a job, this is a very big and important personal thing to me. And when I send out that job offer, I sit there and I can't do anything else until I get a response from them, right? I'm nervous. I'm excited. It's like I asked somebody out to the dance or something like that. So I want somebody who has that same energy, who is as excited about bringing somebody on, or about joining this job as I am about offering somebody a position. And that doesn't mean you need to spend 20 hours building out some like personalized, microsite for applying to Titan. Although I love it when people do. Adam Wathan was the person who did that, and he's certainly got the job. But I would say, if it is a job that means something to you, that you actually care about, and it's not just one in a long list, there are so many opportunities to show that in the cover letter that you send over, in the specifics of your application, and how you show up to the meetings with us. Like one thing I love, and I wish I didn't have to tell people to do this, but it's like people show up and they'll make references to our blog posts during the application process. And I'm like, I'm so sorry that you had to read, 5 hours of the most recent blog post, but it worked because you're paying attention to us and you're trying to get to know us and you're trying to see what it would be like to work here, versus just seeing us as a stepping stone and, in your personal career or something like that.
Definitely. I feel like it means a lot seeing that someone's really invested and they have a passion about what we're also trying to build. I feel like that speaks volumes over what's on a resume. You're trying to really understand and research the company as much as, and you're investing in them as much as the company's going to be investing in you, right?
Yeah, 100%.
We got another question in the chat here from Tasneem. Your advice for a solo developer who's looking to maybe hire new developers and lead them as a team for the first time?
Yeah, I mean, I've talked to a lot of people who've gone from being a solo developer to having either a full agency or mini agency. And the biggest piece of advice I have is, once you do that, you are no longer a developer. You are now a business owner. And, you might not fully have an LLC or whatever, but you now are going to spend a good portion of your time, at minimum, reviewing other people's code, making sure they do it right, doing architecture planning. But likely in most countries, you're also going to have to deal with taxes, and you're going to have to deal with logistics, and you're going to have to deal with how do people get paid and what forms they need to be sent afterwards, whatever. The moment you bring on other people, you are massively complicating the workload that you have on your plate. And that's fine. But a lot of people go into it not realizing that. They say, I'm going to start my own consultancy so I could do more coding. No. The way to do more coding is to have a job as a coder. Starting the consultancy, the last thing you're going to do is more coding. You're going to do more businessing. I would say that the best way to think about how to find those developers and lead them, from leading them perspective, there's probably a bunch of books that can teach you how to be a good leader. Unfortunately, I didn't read any of those, but I do know that I read Radical Candor, a big fan. I also know there's a book Sarah Drasner put out called Engineering Management for the rest of us that would probably be good taking a look at. I own it and have not read it yet. But from finding those people, Larajobs is the answer. I've never found a better hiring platform than Larajobs. If you're not trying to hire people full time and you're trying to bring them on contract, it's a little bit harder, and I don't have a great answer there. I would say that if you're getting started, starting with contractors is significantly easier from a cash flow perspective. If you bring on W-2s, all of a sudden you have to come up with a couple tens of thousands of dollars every other week, and all of a sudden that project that you got really excited about that booked you $20,000. I know this is U.S. money, but that's my context. It's not so exciting when it only gives you 2 more weeks. Like my payroll right now is over $100,000 every 2 weeks. So if we get a $100,000 contract, and I'm like, great, I can make it to the end of the month. So it's just a different world when you have people working underneath you.
Yeah. And I would think too, if you're a solo developer, one thing you may not have done up to that point is like taking that step back into some of your earlier points of like thought, what are my values? What do I want this team to be? Right. And I think it's probably a good idea if you haven't done that to do that before you start bringing people in, because then you're going to know that much better who you're looking for, right, to fill those roles.
Yeah. 100%.
Yeah. All right, we got a couple more in the chat. You got a couple more minutes for us, Matt?
I do. Yeah.
Awesome,
I said I was going to give the talk short, and I was so wrong.
That's
Thank
great.
you for being flexible with
Awesome.
me.
Liam here, just sort of a general question. What do you think about the fact that Titan has spawned so many alumni and gone off and created so many great public things? Must be very rewarding, if nothing else.
Yeah, it's a fun question, because this morning, it hasn't gone out yet, but this morning I recorded a podcast with the Thunk Boys. What's it called? Talking Businessly, about the same topic. And I put out a tweet about this morning, but I recorded that podcast this morning. I did this talk right now, and then Guidance Counselor 2.0 with Taylor Desane also just came out, and it was about the same topic. But each of them, we went about very different aspects of this conversation. So at first I was like, oh God, I feel so bad. I'm putting out 3 pieces of content in the span of a couple of days about the same topic, but each of them went completely different directions. This is the first overlap, which they asked me this exact same question this morning, which is funny, in a call with Daniel Colborn. What do I think about it overall? I think wonderful. This is great. It also is very intentional. I told the story on the podcast with those guys that basically when I hired people, I was just like, first of all, I want you to succeed because I like you. I want you to have a public reputation. I want you to be known and seen and stuff like that. But second of all, at some point, I wanted it to stop being Matt Stauffer and his company, right? Like there was a time where my blog and my personal reputation were the reason Titan kind of got work. And I was like, I would rather that not be the case. I would rather people say, oh my God, Titan is so exciting, not Matt Stauffer and whoever the heck he's working with is so exciting. And so one of the ways to do that is by helping bolster the reputation of the people who are working for us. And so part of that came from hiring brilliant people who we knew were going to do, great stuff. And part of that came from very intentionally bolstering their reputation. Like I would be like, oh, Adam, and I said this on their podcast, but I need to say it very transparently. Adam Wathan got to the level of popularity and success because of Adam Wathan. Period. He's brilliant. He's hardworking. All those things. When he started working at Titan, he had 200 Twitter followers. He was not a super well-known person, and I got to be a part of his growth. I'm not saying I gave him his growth, but I'm saying I was very intentional of introducing to people and getting him connected and hyping him up and putting moments for him to kind of shine for the shining he was doing his own. So everyone here, Adam did his thing, but I got to be a part of it, and I got to be a part of that for Caleb, and I got to be a part of that for Daniel and for other people who've chosen to go that far. And honestly, the big difference between the people who did and did not go on to have these big public reputations is their interest. It was their appetite for being a public persona, because the number of people at Titan now and at Titan in the past who could have done that, and I was like, hey, do you want to be a conference speaker? Hey, do you want to do blah, blah? And they're like, nah, it's not really my thing. That's because of their level of interest, not because of their level of capability. So for me, what I really look at is, oh my God, we have had so many brilliant people at Titan over the years. Here now, here in the past, so freaking proud of them. And it's cool that some of them have gone on to do things publicly. But whether or not it's public, they're amazing.
Yeah, I think that kind of answers you. You did sort of answer Liam's other question here, was what has Titan done to encourage that kind of environment specifically? But I think among other things, you've created the environment to allow the people to flourish as they wish, right?
Yeah, and also, we have 20% time. So in 20% time, people will build some things that, can eventually get them places. I also, it's very important to us to know that every person at Titan will not work here forever, right? Like we have I forget what the
Literally.
blog post is, but a tour of duty. There's a tour of duty blog post that you guys can check out, where we basically had somebody who had just left or was just about to leave. And he told me a year before he left, he's like, hey, I think I'm going to, shift careers. Here's why. I don't know why I'm telling you this, but I feel safe telling you this. And I was like, cool, that's great. What can we do to make the next time good for you until you move somewhere else? And then he went somewhere else and we're still good friends. And so like to me, I'm like, you're not going to work here forever. So how can I be a part of your growth and success long term? Like one thing I ask every single year is like, what does your career trajectory look like? And how can we be a part of helping your career trajectory? But then, if we want to be purely pragmatic and selfish, the more success they see while at Titan and afterwards, the better it reflects on Titan. So I'm just like, it's the rising tide lifts all ships. Let's just do great things for each other. And as long as we're all doing that, it's going to benefit all of us,
Yeah, that's a great point. Margaret, you got any more questions over there?
Yes, I got lots of questions. How are you doing with time, Matt?
I'm pretty sure I'm completely great. Let me double check. Yeah, I'm great. I'm totally good.
Probably touch on one or two more things and then probably wind down here.
Yeah. I see another question in the chat. I guess it kind of deals with understanding how to make sure that Laravel is a good fit, I guess, when you're building a new team and interacting with clients. But I guess, so Vishal writes, when a project includes AI integration and Laravel fits perfectly, especially with microservices and AI capabilities, but the client prefers another framework, how do you handle it?
Yeah, I mean, I would take the when a project includes AI integration out of that question because the answer is the same always. I know that Vishal, does tons of AI work. They're really trying to push AI work that's happening in the Laravel world. And so it does come up in AI specifically because people have this idea that AI has to happen in usually Python, and if not Python, going to be in full stack JavaScript. But that's been the case since the earliest days of Laravel because the amount of work that Titan has lost because we get somebody who understands Laravel, who understands PHP, who brings us in, and then somebody up the chain after we're weeks to months into the process, we've written the contracts, is waiting for a signature, and then some board member or some C-suite person or whatever has a buddy in Silicon Valley who says, oh my gosh, you can't use PHP. I used PHP back in 1992 and it was terrible. And I'm like, yeah, you did. And it was. The only way to solve this problem is to create resources and educational opportunities for the world to know what Laravel is capable of doing that we can use in that moment. Although we're usually not given the option in that moment. Usually once we hear about that story, we've already lost the job, but also just to create broader education in the world. That's why I made the Business of Laravel podcast. That's why I made builtwithlaravel.com. That's why I build the relationships I do with business people outside of our community to try and kind of communicate. That's why I speak at conferences outside the Laravel world. The goal is to try and do that. And I'm not the only person doing that. Thankfully, Aaron Francis has seen a lot of success in the JavaScript world. Because of the Excel investment, we've gotten connections to a lot of people in Silicon Valley and the VC and the PE worlds. So all of these things are towards the general understanding of the world having a better understanding of the fact that Laravel is capable and viable for all these things. And so I think that comes from having technical conversations for sure, but also I think we're not talking technical people. Like we're not running into programmers who are saying Laravel's not a good fit. We're talking programming adjacent people. And so that's why I did. So Built with Laravel is unique in that I didn't accept every applicant. There's a lot of people who are like, hey, I submitted to Built with Laravel and you never came. And I'm like, I'm so sorry. Built with Laravel is made to look impressive to PE and VCs. That's the goal. The goal is for some dude in Silicon Valley who is going to have the ability to weigh in on whether the next big project uses Laravel or not, to go there and see all the big and important and sexy companies that use Laravel and go, oh, well, if Apple uses Laravel, I guess I'm fine, right? That's the goal. And so I'm not the only one doing this, but I'm just hoping that if we all put our efforts in, we can raise people's general awareness of it being a thing.
100%. Maybe one more question?
Yeah, we'll do one more here. This one?
Yeah, Guillermo. Matt.
You can ask the question and I'll work on my camera.
Guillermo's asking here, any tips on gaining confidence/trust and moving up from a junior to a senior on a productive Laravel team? So maybe that's like generally the people that you've seen rise up through the ranks, so to speak, at Titan. What have they done to level themselves up, Matt?
Yeah. So we actually have pretty well-defined specs for what it looks like. So I shared the simple junior, mid, senior kind of levels, but we actually have at least 5 or 10 bullet points for each of those roles to define what their relationship with various aspects of the coding process looks like. And so one thing that's helpful in our team is we tell you, hey, here's what your next step should be. But thanks, Guillermo, for a great question about what people should do broadly. Assuming that you're not in an environment where the team makes it very directly clear to you what you should be doing and how the steps are there, first thing I would do is ask for it. Ask for the people at your company to say, hey, I am a junior and I'm very interested in moving to a mid or senior level position. And I would love for you to tell me what are the metrics and the merits that I can have. What things can I show that you will decide whether I move up from junior or not? And then are there some steps you can help me take to get there? And environments you can put me in to get there. So first of all, go to work. If it's at work, they have the responsibility of doing that for you. If you're not getting that for them, at least see if you can understand from them what they're using to gauge. Even if they're not willing to help you like do the thing, can you at least get an understanding from them of what they're using to gauge your movement up there? And then look for opportunities to do it on your free time. And I hate to say you have to do it in your free time, but often that's just the case. Work on open source projects, create a project of your own, create a small business of your own, like do things that give you practical experience in dealing with people and dealing with, managing the code yourself. What are the pieces of code? What are the pieces of business relationships? What are the pieces of architecture that you don't have practical hands-on experience with? And find opportunities to get that practical hands-on experience, because it's more than any other form of education. Doing the thing gives you that experience. And so if you're like, well, you know what? Like one of the things I often work with our apprentices on is I say, let's go through my book. Or let's go through Laravel docs or whatever and look at all these high level items. Which of these do you not feel like if I put you on a project today working on this at Titan's level, you could handle right now? And they'll often be like, yeah, queues, man, I don't get queues at that level. Or the container, like I know I use it and that's about it. And I'm like, cool, then we're going to give you a project that dives deep into queues and we're going to figure out, what it looks like. And one thing I would often do with our apprentices, I would say, let's try to build one big mega monster project and add a feature that requires this thing, which both requires you to code it, but also you have to understand why it's valuable to something, right? So I'd say, let's build a fake Instagram. Okay, well, what does Instagram do that your application does not? And what is a tool that we can use in the Laravel ecosystem that you've never used before that you will have a practical experience with implementing that thing that allows you to kind of say, oh, I understand why I would use, batch jobs because I had to batch my jobs in this particular circumstance or whatever.
Yeah, I think that's such great advice. Like the practical things. I've the Primeagen, very popular stream. I've heard him talk about. There's no substitute for time in the seat, right?
Yeah,
you can do so many blog posts and tutorials, but ultimately trying to build the thing, and especially build a new feature in an existing application where you don't want to break everything else that's there, right? You might not always get that experience in your day-to-day client work. So yeah, look for opportunities outside of that. And I think too, my 2 cents, like the hunger and curiosity can get you a long way. If you have lots of that, you're going to naturally level yourself up a lot. And I think being on any team, software or otherwise, asking yourself, what can the team use, right? And sometimes as a junior, it's like, hey, I recognize in 2 weeks we're going to be doing this thing. I'm going to go off on a tangent here and do some research into this thing and then bring that back to the team, right? So look for ways that you can fill holes the team might have as well. So yeah, awesome. Well, thanks again, Matt, for joining us. This has been an awesome presentation as always. I've expected nothing less from you, and the discussion is equally as great. So I think a lot of great advice shared, and people are going to benefit from here in the chat. So, any final thoughts or comments from you, Matt, that you wanted to share with the community?
What's the thing that they say in Bill and Ted's? Is it be good to each other? Like that's the whole pitch. Like just be good to each other. The course, the talk, the everything. It's trying to make sure that we can all go out there and take care of our families, take care of our lives, and then help other people do the same thing. So if there's any parting note, it's just that be good to each other.
Thank you. Yes, and then I think worth mentioning one more time on Laracast, if people are interested in this topic, you have a course that's out now. It's partially released. Is that what's the
first 3 episodes are out. I assume the next 3 will be out soon, but I'm not the editor. Their editor is amazing, so I have no shade there. I can't wait to see him.
All right, well check out that course over on Laracast if you have the opportunity. Well, thank you once again, Matt, for joining us, and hope to talk to you soon.
Right, thank you so much, Matt.
Have a great day. All right, Margaret, we've just got a little bit of community stuff to wrap up here before we send everyone on their way. So I'll hand it over to you.
Cool. Thanks so much, Dan. And again, thanks so much to Matt and for putting up that course on Laracast. I'll be checking that out. So thank you for doing that. So for our next meetup, please stay tuned for details. We're hoping to have it in December, and we'll have more information on our meetup.laravel.com website. As for our giveaway, here is another screenshot. If you just want to scan that QR code, again, our giveaway goes until November 11th, and it is a chance to win one of the many JetBrains IDEs for a whole entire year. So make sure to sign up for that, and we'll announce our winner. And if you're the lucky winner, you will be notified via email. And again, if you want to find out some more stuff about when we're having our next meetup or any details, or if you want to contact us about any ideas, or if you'd be interested in speaking, you can always reach us on X as well at Laravel WW Meetup. And then we also have a Blue Sky account, so you can follow us on Blue Sky as well. Again, Laravel WW Meetup is how to find us. And then again, if you'd like to have some emails come in to remind you about when the next meetup is going to be happening, you can check it out at meetup.laravel.com for all the latest meetups that we'll be having. And again, please follow and subscribe to the Laravel YouTube channel. They have a lot of great content on here, as well as our live, but there's a lot of amazing resources to be able to learn more about Laravel and stay up to date with what's going on in the Laravel community.
And that's it. Yes. And maybe a small community note. We have the Laracon AU coming up at the end of next week. I personally have the good fortune to be making the trip down under. So if you are going to be attending Laracon AU, I hope to see you there. And please stop by and say hi if you see me. Margaret, any final thoughts for you before we let the community on their way?
Thanks so much for joining us, and hope to see you next month.
Have a great day, everybody. We'll see you on the next one.
See ya.